Hello, welcome back to my channel if you've been here before. We are still working our way through the first round of revision of my mountaineering thriller novel. The last time we spoke, I was struggling through chapter 4, but a lot of that struggling was because I was just feeling really tired and I just didn't have the concentration to do it. So when I finally was able to rest more, I went back to the start of chapter 4 because it turns out I didn't really edit very well when I was tired, which not much of a surprise there. And I'm actually on a bit of a roll right now. So I've been working for about half an hour to an hour every evening so far this week. This is the 4th in a row day that I'm working on it. And it's honestly become a highlight of my day. I look forward to being able to wind down in the evening and work on this. And so you probably want to know what my progress is. So I did chapter 4, chapter 5, 6, 7, 8, and we just finished chapter 9. I know, we did 5 chapters in 4 days. But this is the cleaner section. And I thought it would start to get a lot rougher after chapter 7, but I was pleasantly surprised with the last 2 chapters. They're still looking pretty good. Though I want to go back through the last 2 just to make sure I'm adding this one element, just a few hints here or there before I move on to chapter 10. A lot of how I'm doing this editing is copy pasting over the new chapter and then going through and doing bigger edits in some places, or I tend to keep a lot of the dialogue the same because I feel like the dialogue is something that comes out clean the first time around, because in a way it doesn't really have to be that clean, right? It has to just feel natural and based off of the characters' personalities. So that's a little bit easier for me to get the first go around. I have cut some dialogue when it just seems to go on a bit too much and it's not really that necessary. But those first 9 chapters originally were 18,253 words. And then now the 9 chapters in the second draft is 19,425 words. So I added about 1,200 words across those 9 chapters. Also totally expected. To be honest, I don't see a lot of word count being added until the second half of the story when things start to get a bit skimped out on. The story's actually feeling really exciting. I mean, I know what's going to happen, but the way I set up certain chapters and stuff, I even get excited for what's about to come. I was a little nervous about chapter 5 and chapter 6 because they tend to be a little slower. The first 4 were really ramping up, starting this thing off with a bang. And then there's a bit more kind of setup in between there before now we're kind of taking off again. And I've been debating whether or not it's too slow and whether I should try removing stuff. But again, I think it's important setup, but at the same time, this is a thriller, so we need to make sure every chapter is really propelling the story forward. Anyways, for now, I'm just going to leave it, and then I think I'll want to do one just read through before my next round of revision, and so I can kind of gauge then how fast things are going, because I did go back through chapter 5 multiple times before I started to feel good about it. So in my head, it's maybe longer than it is just because I've been going through it a bunch of times. Overall, though, this edit's going really well. It's going so well that it makes me a little bit nervous. So this is my 5th thriller that I've written in the last 5 years. And this one and the previous one haven't, I mean, at this point, there could be lots of changes to come. But even the thriller I wrote before this one, it came out in the first draft pretty clean in the sense that there aren't a lot of big developmental edits to be made. There's small tweaks, there's smoothing out arcs and things like that, but not really huge rewrites or just scrapping big sections or adding new ones, at least not yet. It's good in a way because I'm going through this quickly, but because I always like to find something to be worried about. I'm also nervous that I'm maybe not looking at a bigger picture and I'm not able to think critically about this story and get rid of stuff. Anyways, revision, it's very easy to get bogged down in all these little things. So I'm just going to keep moving, go back through those last 2 chapters to add what I need to add, and keep going to chapter 10. And we are closing in on the end of Act 1, honestly, pretty quickly here. There are 14 chapters in Act 1, so we have 5 more chapters to go before we're into Act 2, and Act 2's lengthier. So let's keep writing so we don't lose any momentum. Happy Saturday. I have been continually writing every day now. This is the 6th day in a row. I've just gotten to the end of chapter 11, so we're making our slow, steady progress. Though I'm going to go back through this chapter one more time. Because one of the things that, especially now that it's getting a little rougher and there's more for me to change, it's also been a bit of a mindset shift, because when I'm writing the first draft, the rough draft, I'm very focused on not letting myself go back at all. Like, once a chapter's written, move forward, no editing, nothing. And so I started to have a bit of that mindset with this draft as well, where I was like, I'm going to do one pass and I'm going to keep going and, not really let myself look back, which I think was the wrong strategy for this first round of revision. I have 3 things that I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on the main character's arc, the main character's perceived weakness, as well as really trying to identify the purpose of every chapter and really trying to make each chapter propel the story forward, which is again why I was hesitating over chapter, I think it was 5 and 6. By the end of this revision, I want to have all these 3 things really solid. And sometimes that means going back over a chapter multiple times. So it's been a bit of I don't know if it's a learning curve, but a change of mindset for me to allow myself to go back and rework the same chapter multiple times and have that opportunity to try out different things. If I don't like a specific exchange, can I frame it in a different way? And then I look back over it again, I'm like, I don't know if this is exactly what I wanted. And it's kind of nice to just have the time to really fiddle around with these more scene level details. Inevitably, it's also hard when you're in this editing stage not to be over nitpicky and really start spiraling in the sense of, is any of this good? Does this chapter even need to be here? That sort of thing. What I think is really helpful is while I'm editing, I am as well reading another book. So I'm reading The City of Brass. And even though my writing style is not like hers at all, the writing style in this book is so beautiful and eloquent, and my writing is definitely a lot more like to the point, minimal flowery language, which, has its own pros or cons. But it's also helpful reading that and being like, oh, there is like empty space in this book. Like, not every single sentence doesn't have to be overly thought out in the sense that it's driving something forward, giving you information. You can spend a little bit more time with exposition. You can spend a little bit more time with these character moments and not feel the need to rush. Of course, this is a fantasy book and I'm writing a thriller, so it's slightly different. I think just having breaks in my editing where I read published prose, it gives me this sense of comfort. Writing's starting to get a bit rougher. Now I'm finding more and more that there are things that I'm not as keen on and I want to switch up. I have those moments of like, I want to keep pushing, I want to finish this revision, I want to finish Act 1. And so I'm like, it's fine, right? It's fine. I can leave it. It's not a big deal. But it nags at me, and I know that I want my story to be as good as it can be in the sense of a reflection of what I want it to be. And so making these changes is important for that. So now this is the edit where I'm being thorough. I'm going through every single chapter. The next round of revisions, I'm going to be focusing on very specific like characters or themes, where I'm probably just going to pop in and out of certain chapters and not really go through every single line of the book. So this is really my opportunity to go through and make sure that the story is really what I want it to be. The character interactions are what I really want it to be. I'll probably do, more of a line pass at the end just for language and tightening up grammar and sentence structure and stuff. But this is the time to really focus on what is on the page. How are these characters behaving? How are they moving? What does the flow of description look like relative to the flow of dialogue and internal thoughts, and making sure that the main character is really being portrayed the way that I want her to be. I'm honestly surprised with myself with how quickly I fell into this really steady writing routine. I think if I'd tried to force it, if I'd said to myself that I have to write every single day, I don't think I actually would have been able to succeed with it. I'm often the type of person to set goals for myself and just fall off after like a week, but this really felt different. It almost felt like a natural progression of my day to start writing again. I'll never forget the first thriller that I wrote back in winter 2020. It was my first winter in Alaska, and I was by myself for I think almost like 2 weeks in the middle of the holiday season around Christmas, just because I didn't want to travel back to Vancouver when COVID was at its height. And I wrote almost every single day, all day, for 2 weeks straight. I was doing multiple revision passes of the first thriller I wrote for that NaNoWriMo, so the month before. And I remember just getting into this really intense zone that I don't know that I've ever been able to get back into, where I just lived and breathed that story. This is nowhere near as intense as that is, but it just feels nice to really be pulled in and not feel like I'm forcing myself to have to sit down and write. And just like that, we are done chapter 14, which is what I have put as my act 1. I'm gonna say I don't know exactly that this is act 1. I've been struggling a lot with trying to quantify it because the next chapter is the start of the actual competition. Like, it's day of, about to start the race. So in that sense, it really feels like we're entering a new act because we're physically moving from the starting, gathering the team, the prep stuff, to it's about to start. Emotionally, when I think about the main character, and act 2 is when they're very decided in what they're going to do and their plan is set, they're good to go. It feels like act 2 may have started a bit earlier. Glad to say we are done 14 chapters and we're just about, I think, 32,000 words revised, which again, this is all of act 1, 30,000 words for act 1 promises the story to be a lot longer than I think it's going to be. So I'm trying not to overthink it. I think doing a read through after this draft is over and just checking like pacing and stuff will be really helpful. And this draft isn't also about doing everything all at once, because even though I'm working through the main character's internal arc, her feelings, whatever, I still feel like maybe I'm missing a bit more flesh. Like, I don't have as many descriptions as maybe I should have. There's some areas where I don't go quite as deep into internal thoughts as maybe I should. I don't know. I've been debating a lot about that because I think that my style is a little bit like less is more with the internal thoughts, and let the reader come to their own conclusions on what she's feeling and what she's thinking based on how she reacts to other people. But I think sometimes it's maybe too sparse, but that's a problem for another time. Right now, we're just focusing on making sure that her arc is consistent, her feelings are consistent, all of that. I think act 1 is pretty good. Like, I'm happy with all the things that happen. Honestly, I'm impressed with the me that plotted this, because every time I'm going to a new chapter, I'm like, okay, great, what's going to happen here? And I notice that I keep doing all these little escalations. So an escalation is basically when you take what the story is going to be like and then you just make it a bit more dangerous, you just make it more intense than what it is. You're constantly raising the stakes, and I think that's really important for a thriller. And it's something that I've struggled with, especially when I don't plot, is that the story kind of has this sameness and it drags on for longer than it needs to before things really start happening. So I think the main thing for this next chunk of story is going to be really delivering on the competition. People feel like they're in this adventure with me. I know this will be when things start to get a bit tougher, because the middle of the book is when you're starting to lose momentum from that first act, from that first series of chapters, and it's before you get to the end where everything starts to steamroll. So it might take me a bit longer to get through this next section, but I'm honestly really impressed with myself having gotten through this first 14 chapters in, I think, like 2 or 3 weeks. I'm anticipating that this steady everyday progress I have going on is not going to last forever. And honestly, I'm so excited right now to go into act 2. Like, I feel like the reason I wanted to write this book was this middle section, was going on these big adventures in the mountains, camping, hiking, going through difficult terrain. That this is the reason I wrote this story. Just having this really consistent pace is what's needed, because novels aren't written in a few days of long work. They're written over months maybe years of just this steady progress, slowly picking away at stuff. So thank you for sticking with me as we get through Act 1, and I'll catch you when we start on Act 2.